Nobody thought that hell was supposed to be frozen over, but it looks like it's hell on those people in Atlanta who are stuck in their cars for hours, abandoning their cars. The roads are locked up. Same thing down in Alabama. The freeze has been bad, and thousands of cars were still stranded on highways this morning. The relentless fallout from a brutal winter storm continues throughout the South.
Yeah, it led to a state of emergency in 6 states throughout the South, and the storm caused at least 13 deaths. Charlene Israel has the story.
Snow and slick ice paralyzed the Deep South. Crashes, some deadly, blocked roads and highways. Cars jammed for miles with no way out. Frustrated drivers stranded, many for almost 24 hours. Across the South, icy misery from Florida to here in Virginia Beach. The storm caught many off guard. The rare storm dropped just 2 inches of snow in Atlanta, bringing the city to a screeching halt.
I was on ice and it just kept slipping and I thought I was going to tumble over.
The engine running and the heat going and surfing Facebook.
One mother-to-be stuck miles from the hospital gave birth on I-285 to a baby girl named Grace. Some say officials should have been better prepared.
I've been on the road for 16 hours. Someone needs to be held accountable.
Georgia's governor admits mistakes were made.
We all have some lessons we need to learn here.
But not all the misery was on the roads. More than 4,000 flights were delayed across the country. And hundreds of children in Alabama were trapped at schools for a second night. Roads still too dangerous for them to leave.
I want to go home.
Meanwhile, the National Guard has been called in to help stranded motorists.
You always want to make sure that the kids are taken care of. We'll put them in the Humvee just so they can warm up.
Good Samaritans are also lending a helping hand.
Handing out drinks and helping people get moving. 4-wheel drive makes it a lot easier. So really just kind of clearing up jams.
I said, "What you got?" He said, "I got Coke, water, 7-Up." I said, "How much?" He said, "Free." I said, "I'll take one."
Charlene Israel, CBN News.
Well, it was a little chilly around here, too, but, you know, it wasn't bad. I mean, somebody said it was 8 this morning, and it showed 12 outside my house, and then...
We must be getting used to it, because I went out for a walk last night, and
nice.
It was gorgeous. I walked around the Founder's Inn Lake. Pat, I'm worried about the swan. Lake Didi has frozen over at Swan Terrace, and the swan is just sort of stuck there. You think he'll be all right?
Those swans are very resilient. Don't worry about it. They will have a long, happy life.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Okay. Well, the President's State of the Union address brought the smallest audience in years, but he took to the airways Tuesday night. It seems that not much of the nation was watching. John Jessup has that story from Washington.
Pat, as you stated, President Obama's State of the Union speech Tuesday night had the smallest TV audience since Bill Clinton's last speech in 2000. Just over 33 million people tuned in for the speech, according to Nielsen ratings. Analysts think the speech will do little to help the president's low public approval ratings. The president of Ukraine has taken sick leave in the middle of a national crisis. The government says President Viktor Yanukovych is suffering an acute respiratory illness and high fever. This comes as the Eastern European country is in the middle of political turmoil, and leaders there warn of possible civil war. George Thomas is on the scene in Kiev.
Ukraine's prime minister has resigned. So too has the cabinet. But talk with many of the tens of thousands of protesters on the streets of Kiev. They will tell you this is not enough.
We are demanding the resignation of the parliament, of the president, for snap presidential and parliament elections to take place.
This is ground zero, the epicenter, the battlefield for the opposition forces. You see, for more than 2 months, tens of thousands of people have gathered in downtown Kiev, demanding that the president of Ukraine step down.
The crisis started last November after Russia's president got the president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, to refuse a major trade deal and closer ties with the European Union for closer relations with Russia instead.
So you think that Russia is trying to force...
Michael Chernikov is an analyst in Kiev. He says from Kremlin's perspective, Russia has no borders.
Russia thinks Ukraine is still part of their territory, part of their empire, so they were more than happy to help bail out Ukraine.
But it wasn't what many Ukrainians wanted, so they took to the streets by the thousands. The protests have since morphed into demands for human rights, less corruption, more democracy, and an end to the government's authoritarian policies.
People see the policies of President Yanukovych as a symbol of everything that is wrong with our country, so they want new leadership, a new direction.
Earlier this month, Yanukovych pushed through new laws to crack down on protests, but the laws were abruptly repealed this week after violent clashes between police and protesters. Ukraine was once part of the Soviet Union until its independence in 1991. Home to roughly 45 million people, the country is split between pro-European regions in the west and pro-Russian areas in the east. Some fear the crisis could spark a civil war between the two regions. On Tuesday, thousands of pro-government supporters took to the streets of Kiev.
We don't want a split in the country, a civil war, because during a civil war there are no winners. We just need to sit down and talk.
Despite attempts to talk, the clashes continue around the country, and the government's control grows increasingly tenuous. George Thomas, CBN News, Kiev, Ukraine.
Here at home, the Academy Awards has rescinded its nomination of a song for the faith-based film Alone But Not Alone. Christian author and speaker Joni Eareckson Tada performs the song. The Academy says composer Bruce Broughton used his influence as a former Academy governor to get the nomination. Broughton says all he did was send an email asking others to consider it. The Academy president said sending the email crossed the line because it gives the appearance of an unfair advantage, an accusation Broughton calls ridiculous.
If I learned to game the system, I probably would have had a nomination before this. The last nomination I had was 30 years ago.
Other members of the Academy say the ruling is unfair, including famous film composer Hans Zimmer, who wrote the music for movies like The Gladiator. Well, Sunday's Super Bowl is expected to have the highest audience ever, something that will undoubtedly make advertisers happy. They're paying up to $4.5 million for a 30-second commercial and $8 million for a 60-second ad. As for the game itself, the Broncos are seen as a slight favorite, but many experts are divided, and most expect a close game. Pat, who's your odds-on favorite?
You know, I won that contest one year, picking the closest score of a particular game of the Super Bowl. I've got a little trophy in my office to prove it. I have no idea who it is. The people, there's a computer that they put on it, and the computer says by 2 points the Seahawks will win. The others say you got Manning, and it's a question about how cold it is, how windy it is.
I don't know how a computer could tell that, because there's so many factors, like you said, with weather and how people are feeling, and
well, I mean, you might as well have a computer. I mean, you could, you know, look at the entrails of a chicken or something and figure it out. But who knows? I mean, it's going to be very close. But the question is, if it's warm, it could be a high-scoring game. If it's really cold, the guys can't get their hand on the ball to throw, and the passes will be a little bit off. And that, you know, Manning depends on a lot of passes, so we'll see. But the Seahawks are certainly dedicated, and so are the Broncos.
Yeah, it's going to be a good game, for sure.
Well, it should be a good game. You know, the thing was, maybe a third of the tickets weren't sold, but I think probably by now the tickets, because people thought the weather was going to be so gross up there in New York. But I think it'll be better. But think of that, $4.5 million for 30 seconds.
Wow. Are you kidding me?
That's the price of a 30-second commercial, $4.5 million.
Well, it's good publicity.
Focus for that one. Okay.
The military's top chaplains told a House subcommittee that service members are free to share their religious faith with others within limits. The Navy chief of chaplains said religious sharing should stop if it's clearly unwelcome. The Army's deputy chief of chaplains said troops should avoid demeaning others. And the Air Force deputy chief of chaplains said a commanding officer can be open about his faith as long as he makes clear it's personal and not official, and he's not pressuring subordinates. Southern Baptist Convention leaders will host a summit in Nashville in April focusing on sex. The topics will range from pornography, teen sex, and homosexuality to how pastors can talk to their congregations about human sexuality. The sessions will include discussions on how the gospel can shape a person's sexual identity, redeem sexual desire, and set people free who are held captive by sin. The events will be mainstreamed live on the web. And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.